Every other week or so, we talk to the Ithaca Times Michael Nocella about some of the stories he's been covering in and around town in the last few weeks. And today, we'll be talking about the grant the IPD may receive from the Department of Homeland Security for equipment upgrades and some of the recent opposition to that grant. Michael, thanks for stopping by.
Always a pleasure, Sam.
So just to get us started, can you kind of set up the basics of this grant? I mentioned the money would be coming from Homeland Security, but I understand the IPD, the Ithaca Police Department, had to apply for this grant.
Right. So this was on the Common Council's agenda for their August meeting, and on the agenda is what appeared to be a pretty straightforward thing. IPD getting $100,000 from Homeland Security for equipment. We're going to vote on it tonight. Based off that, I thought it was just going to be one of those things like, those in favor, aye, there you go. But some of the Common Council members noticed that some of the equipment that was included for the grant was a little bizarre, such as night vision goggles and a $40,000 tactical robot. So they were like, we want to know more about this. Can someone from IPD be here to explain what's going on? Mm-hmm. So they tabled the vote for September 3rd. Since then, I believe IPD has given city officials a presentation about what they were allowed to apply for and why what they selected is needed for their police force. And from the council members who spoke at last night's city administration committee meeting, they came away generally pretty impressed with IPD's explanation. And so if I had to take a guess right now, I would say that it's going to go through, but we'll find that out for sure in September. So, yeah.
And you mentioned night vision goggles and this specific kind of tactical robot. Having heard the IPD's kind of pitch, I guess, essentially to the Common Council for why they might need these items, what did you think about that pitch? Kind of what was their line of reasoning?
Well, I haven't seen the presentation, and I actually have to do a little bit more digging myself before the September 3rd meeting to get a better handle on all the logistics. I'm actually meeting with Officer Jamie Williamson tomorrow morning to discuss this. But generally, their explanation is that these aren't weaponry. They're more tools of safety, is how it's been described by Chief Barber, that will, in certain situations, help them handle situations without using weapons or violence.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that when this came up in August, it seemed like a pretty innocuous thing. But I understand that just in the last week, there's been kind of a sea change in terms of the community's response to this grant.
Right. Well, I think that, this flew under the radar. It was just one of those things that kind of got lost in the agenda until it got tabled. Once it got tabled, obviously we reported on it. I think other media reported that it got tabled, so it kind of brought it to the attention of residents. And so once you had that, and then you had the situation on August 9th, and then you have the situation in Ferguson, I think residents are on high alert right now in terms of holding local police responsible for their actions and what they have in terms of equipment. You see what's going on in Ferguson with all these SWAT teams and a bit of chaos, and I think, Ithacans are thinking we would never want something like that to happen here. So when you see in just its most basic form, IPD's getting $100,000 for SWAT equipment is how it's been described in some situations. I think without doing more research, their minds just assume the worst. And like I said, with the touchy subject on August 9th, it's kind of a perfect storm, if you will, in terms of jumping to kind of the worst case scenario.
Yeah, and people, I think you'd have to be kind of living under a rock to not have heard and seen what's been happening in Ferguson, Missouri. But for those who maybe aren't aware of the incident in Ithaca that you were referring to that happened around that same time, can you maybe explain that for us?
Yeah, so on Friday, August 9th, as IPD described the situation, there was an unusual wave of events. I think there was 2 arsons and a burglary between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. And so they were looking for suspects connected to those crimes. They first said in the midst of this, a police officer identified 4 suspects on bicycles and pursued them as suspects. The suspects ended up being 4 15-year-old African-American boys who were from the other side of the story, just minding their own business on their way home from playing basketball. Since the officer was not in uniform, he rolled down the window and told them he was a police officer and told them that he wanted to search their bags to see if they were connected to some recent activity. They were, I think, apparently he had been following them a little bit, and he wasn't in a police car, so they were a little spooked. And so I think they, if I have it right, they fled, and then he chased them further. And then at one point, once he tracked them down, he pulled out his gun, and according to IPD's report, he kept it in a low raised position and didn't point it, but nonetheless, he brought it out and threatened them. He also said that he was going to release his canine dog in his car when he didn't have a canine dog in the car. So definitely a lot of explaining to do on IPD's report. And I think it was Ithaca Voice who pointed out that, so IPD, like I said, they tried to explain what happened, at least at first, that this officer was pursuing these 4 suspects in connection with 3 things that were happening within this hour. The Ithaca Voice did some pretty good detective work and got the dispatch tapes from this time, and it seems that this went down about an hour and a half after this actually happened, after midnight, when the other suspects for the other crimes had already been found and detained. So definitely a lot of explaining to do. Chief Barber spoke briefly on it in last night's committee meeting and stressed that residents and local media need to be careful. IPD's doing an internal investigation and have not concluded anything yet. And so that's kind of where we are with everything.
Mm-hmm. And it just so happened that this incident occurred while the IPD was kind of waiting for final approval for this grant funding.
Yeah, and I think it was Alderperson Graham Kerslick who said these are 2 distinct situations and things. They have nothing to do with each other. And so, but like I said, it's human nature when you have these 3 things going, and all there more or less comes down to police, weapons, and how police are using those weapons. It's really easy for the human brain to kind of throw them all into one net.
I think that's quite understandable. If you have questions about what your police force is doing, maybe you're not going to be so gung-ho about giving them more tools, right, if you don't know what those tools are being used towards. So understanding that there's been this kind of recent mobilization, I understand there's been a petition circulated, correct?
Right, yeah. I think it started about 2 days ago, I want to say. Yesterday there was already about almost 100 people who had signed the petition to stop council not to stop them from voting, but for them to vote no on this grant. And I haven't checked on it today to see where it is in terms of picking up steam, but last night, Trumansburg resident, who I guess Jamie Hendricks, she's kind of leading the charge, or at least organizing this, and she spoke last night just to bring it to the attention of city administration. And yeah, basically the gist is, right now there's some residents are, they have questions and then they want answered. I'm looking at the petition right now, and there's some people gave a comment along with their signature. And so Ari Moore from Ithaca says, "My family wants to be safe. This doesn't make us safer. This makes us more frightened." Roland Coggin from Ithaca says, "It is toxic to our children to have a militarized police force. We don't need tanks and armored vehicles to protect and serve our needs in Ithaca." So that's kind of where things get hyperbolic. This grant's not for tanks, and that's where you kind of say, these residents maybe need to educate themselves on what exactly is going on before jumping to conclusions. At the same time, they're absolutely right to ask these questions and for an explanation from IPD and the city before anything like this gets approved.
Mm-hmm. And just thinking about the IPD's investigation into the incident that happened on August 9th, is there any kind of timeline set for when the community might hear what the IPD has to say?
No. Like I mentioned, I'm meeting with Officer Jamie Williamson and Chief Barber tomorrow, and I'm actually the cover story for next week's issue is more or less about this topic, so hopefully those are details I hope to get for next week. But yeah, I don't really know how long an investigation like this could take.
Yeah, and stories like these can take a long time, and I'm sure by next week you'll have some more updates for us. And I have been speaking with Michael Nocella, a reporter for the Ithaca Times, about the Homeland Security grant that may soon provide funding to the IPD and how that grant has been impacted by recent community interactions with that very same Ithaca Police Department. Michael, thank you so much for stopping by.
Always a pleasure, Sam.